Be honest with yourself for a moment. When was the last time you felt genuinely at peace? Not because someone texted you back, not because someone complimented you, not because someone chose to stay, but simply because you were alive and breathing? If you had to think about it, that already tells you something. Here is a truth that might sting a little, but I promise it comes from a place of care. If your emotional state depends on who replies, who stays, who notices you, or who gives you attention, then your happiness does not actually belong to you. It belongs to whoever you have handed that invisible remote control to. And the scary part? Most of the time, they do not even know they are holding it. Now, I am not saying this to make you feel bad. I am saying this because I have been there. I know what it feels like to refresh your phone, hoping for a message that somehow proves you matter. I know what it feels like when silence from someone you care about suddenly feels like a verdict against your worth. And I know how exhausting it is to carry that weight every single day while pretending everything is fine. Has that ever happened to you? That moment where someone just slightly pulls away. Maybe they are busy, maybe they are distracted, and your entire mood shifts, like the ground beneath you just cracked a little. If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because what we are about to walk through together is going to change how you experience every single day from this point on. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about shutting people out. This is about learning, maybe for the first time, how to feel whole, steady, and genuinely okay from the inside out, without needing anyone's permission to feel that way. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Silent Dependence on Validation. There is a pattern that runs underneath almost everything we do. Our conversations, our relationships, our decisions, even our silences. And most people never notice it. It operates like background music in a film. You do not consciously hear it, but it shapes everything you feel. That pattern is the need for external validation. And before you say, "That is not me, I am pretty independent," let me ask you something. When someone you care about does not respond to your message for hours, what happens in your body? Not in your logical mind, your body. Does your chest tighten just slightly? Does your stomach feel a little unsettled? Do you catch yourself replaying what you last said, scanning for something you might have done wrong? Or how about this? When you put real effort into something, maybe a project at work, maybe something personal you cared about, and nobody acknowledges it. No "great job," no recognition. Does a small part of you deflate, even just a little? Be honest. Because this is not about judgment. This is about seeing clearly. The truth is, most of us were trained into this dependency long before we had any say in the matter. Think about it. When you were a child, the equation was brutally simple. Behave well, and you receive warmth. Get good results, and you are celebrated. Agree with the adults around you, stay quiet, avoid making waves, and you are rewarded with acceptance. Nobody sat you down and said, "Your worth depends on other people's approval." Nobody had to. It was taught through 1,000 tiny moments. A smile when you performed well, a cold shoulder when you did not, a hug when you made someone proud, silence when you disappointed them. And over the years, that lesson did not fade. It hardened. It became wiring. It became the invisible operating system running your emotional life. Now, as an adult, that same wiring shows up in ways you might not immediately recognize. You are at dinner with friends and someone makes a comment that feels slightly dismissive. Logically, you know it probably meant nothing, but emotionally, you spend the drive home replaying it, dissecting it, wondering, or maybe someone you have been close to starts responding differently. Shorter texts, fewer calls, a shift in energy. You have not done anything wrong, but your mind does not care about logic in those moments. It launches into investigation mode. What changed? Was it something I said last Tuesday? Are they pulling away? Am I losing them? Have you ever done that? Turned into a detective over something that probably had nothing to do with you at all? Here is what is really happening beneath the surface. Your nervous system learned years ago that other people's responses equal safety. Attention means you are secure. Approval means you are worthy. And when either one wavers, even slightly, your body responds as though something genuinely dangerous is happening. Your heart rate might increase. Your thoughts might race. You might feel an urgent need to fix, explain, or reach out. Not because the situation is actually threatening, but because your emotional system was built on a foundation that depends on external input. And this is where it gets really tricky. You can be a highly capable, successful, intelligent person and still be running on this system. In fact, many of the most driven people you know are unconsciously fueled by it. They achieve not purely out of passion, but partly out of a deep need to be seen, acknowledged, validated. The hustle looks like ambition on the outside, but underneath, it is often a quiet question repeating on loop. Am I enough yet? Do they see me now? Think about social media for a second. Why does posting something and getting very few likes sometimes create a sinking feeling, even when you know rationally that a number on a screen means nothing? It is because that ancient wiring equates visibility with value. Low engagement feels, on a primal level, like being ignored in a room full of people. Does that resonate with you? Have you ever caught yourself checking how a post performed and felt your mood shift based on the result? Now, here is the part that requires real courage to accept. As long as your emotional stability is tethered to other people's responses, you will never feel truly at rest. You might have moments of peace, when someone is being attentive, when things feel secure, when the people around you are behaving exactly as you need them to. But that peace is conditional. It is borrowed. And borrowed peace always has to be returned. Imagine building your house on someone else's land. You can decorate it beautifully. You can fill it with everything you love. But at any moment, the landowner can change the terms, and suddenly, everything you built feels unstable. That is what it is like to build your emotional life on external validation. It can look beautiful, but it is never truly yours. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this deeply. The idea that craving, especially craving approval, is one of the most invisible chains we carry is not new. It has been observed for thousands of years. When you crave someone's validation to feel okay, you have created a dependency that looks nothing like addiction on the surface, but operates in almost the same way. The reassurance gives you temporary relief. The absence of it creates withdrawal, and you find yourself going back again and again, not because it fulfills you, but because you cannot yet tolerate the discomfort of going without it. But here is the hopeful part, and I really need you to hear this. The very first step out of this cycle is not some massive transformation. It is not years of therapy or a spiritual retreat on a mountain. It is something much simpler and much more accessible. It is awareness. Just start noticing. That is it. Start paying attention to how your emotional state shifts in response to other people. When you feel a sudden wave of anxiety after someone's tone changes, notice it. When you feel a rush of relief after receiving a compliment, notice it. When you feel hollow because someone did not acknowledge your effort, notice it. Do not judge it. Do not criticize yourself for it. Do not try to fix it immediately. Just see it. Because something remarkable happens when you observe a pattern without reacting to it. The pattern begins to lose its grip. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, like loosening a knot one thread at a time. You will start to have moments, maybe brief at first, where someone's inconsistency does not rattle you the way it used to, where a delayed response does not send you spiraling, where silence from someone you care about feels uncomfortable but not catastrophic. Those moments, that is emotional freedom beginning to take root. And I want you to know, genuinely, that it is available to you. Not someday. Not when your life looks different. Right now. Starting with the simple, quiet act of paying attention to what is already happening inside you. That is where we begin. And from here, it only gets deeper. Chapter 2. Becoming comfortable in your own presence. Here is something most people will never admit out loud. They are not actually afraid of being alone. They are afraid of what happens inside their head when no one else is around. Think about it for a second. When was the last time you sat somewhere with no phone, no music, no podcast, no screen, no conversation, just you in complete silence? And I do not mean falling asleep. I mean being fully awake with absolutely nothing to distract you. If that thought alone makes you slightly uncomfortable, you are not alone in that. Most people have not experienced genuine stillness in years, maybe decades. And there is a reason for that. The moment everything goes quiet, your mind gets loud, not in a pleasant, reflective way, in a messy, uncomfortable, sometimes overwhelming way. Old conversations replay themselves. Regrets you thought you had buried suddenly float back to the surface. That embarrassing thing you said 3 years ago, it shows up uninvited. That relationship that ended badly, your mind wants to revisit it in full detail. Those doubts about whether you are on the right path, they line up like passengers waiting to board. Has that ever happened to you? You finally get a quiet evening to yourself, and instead of feeling relaxed, you feel restless, almost agitated, like your brain does not know what to do without input. That restlessness is not random. It is a signal. It is telling you that somewhere along the way, you learned to use external noise as a shield against your own inner world. And when the shield is removed, everything that was hiding behind it becomes visible. Most of us were never taught how to be with ourselves. Think about your entire education, years and years of learning. You were taught mathematics, language, history, science. You were taught how to perform, how to compete, how to achieve. You were taught how to interact with others, how to make impressions, how to fit in. But were you ever taught how to sit with a difficult emotion without running from it? Were you ever taught how to process sadness without immediately distracting yourself? Were you ever shown how to be alone in a room and feel genuinely okay? For most people, the answer is no. And that gap, that missing skill, is one of the biggest reasons so many adults struggle with solitude. It is not that being alone is inherently painful. It is that we were never given the tools to make it feel safe. So what do we do instead? We fill every gap. We scroll through our phones the moment there is a pause. We put on a podcast the second we get in the car. We text someone, anyone, when the evening feels too quiet. We binge content not because we are genuinely interested, but because the alternative, sitting with our own thoughts, feels unbearable. And here's the thing. There is nothing wrong with enjoying music or podcasts or connection. Those things are wonderful. But when they become the only thing standing between you and your own mind, they stop being enjoyment. They become avoidance. Let me ask you something personal. When you reach for your phone first thing in the morning, before your feet even touch the floor, is it because you genuinely want to check something? Or is it because the silence of waking up alone with your thoughts feels like too much empty space? Be honest with yourself. No one is watching. No one is judging. This is just between you and your own awareness right now. The reason this matters, the reason I am spending time on this, is because your relationship with solitude is the foundation of everything else we are going to talk about. If you cannot sit with yourself peacefully, you will always need someone or something to fill that space. And that need will quietly run your life. Now, here is where it starts to shift. Silence is not your enemy. I know it can feel that way. I know that when the room goes quiet and your mind starts pulling up old files you did not ask for, it can feel like something is going wrong. But nothing is going wrong. Something is actually going right. Your mind is finally getting a chance to process what it has been carrying. Think of it like a room you have been throwing things into for years without organizing. Every uncomfortable emotion, every unresolved experience, every thought you pushed aside because you were too busy, it all went into that room. And the door stayed shut because there was always noise, always activity, always something to keep you from opening it. Silence opens that door. And yes, at first, it is overwhelming. The mess is real, the clutter is heavy, but the mess was always there. Silence did not create it. Silence just revealed it. And here is the beautiful part. Once you start sitting with that mess instead of running from it, something changes. Slowly, not overnight, but it changes. You begin to notice your thought patterns. You start seeing how often your mind criticizes you. You start noticing how quickly it jumps to worst-case scenarios. You start recognizing the stories it tells. Stories about not being enough, about being left behind, about being fundamentally flawed in some way. And as you notice these patterns, something subtle but powerful happens. You start to separate from them. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. And that distinction changes everything. When a thought says, "Nobody really cares about you," and you are identified with that thought, it feels like truth. It hits you in the chest. It colors your entire day. But when you observe that same thought from a slight distance, when you notice it arise and simply say to yourself, "There is that thought again," it loses its weight. It becomes a cloud passing through, not a permanent sky. Have you ever watched a river from a bridge? The water moves constantly. Leaves float by. Debris drifts past. But the bridge does not move. You can stand there and watch everything flow beneath you without being carried away by it. That is what learning to sit with your own mind feels like. The thoughts still move. The emotions still rise and fall. But you are the bridge. You stay steady. This does not happen instantly. I want to be real with you about that. The first time you try sitting alone in silence for 10 minutes, your mind might resist hard. You might feel anxious. You might feel bored. You might feel an almost physical urge to grab your phone or turn something on. That is completely normal. That resistance is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something your mind is not used to. And anything unfamiliar feels uncomfortable at first. But if you stay with it, even for a few minutes longer than feels natural, you start building something invaluable. You start building tolerance for your own inner world. And that tolerance is the beginning of real comfort with yourself. Over time, something shifts in how you experience being alone. It stops feeling empty and starts feeling spacious. It stops feeling like something is missing and starts feeling like something is opening. You begin to enjoy the quiet, not because your mind has become silent, it never fully does, but because you are no longer afraid of what it has to say. And when you reach that point, when being alone with yourself feels safe instead of threatening, your entire relationship with the outside world changes. You stop reaching for people out of desperation. You stop filling every gap with noise. You stop using connection as a painkiller. Instead, you start choosing connection from a place of wholeness. You spend time with people because you genuinely enjoy them, not because you need them to distract you from yourself. You engage in conversations because you want to, not because silence scares you. You reach out to others from overflow, not from emptiness. And that shift, from needing people to fill your silence to choosing people to share your fullness, is one of the most liberating things you will ever experience. Your own presence is not something to escape from. It is something to come home to. And the more comfortable you become in that home, the less anything outside of it can shake you. That comfort is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything we are building here together. Chapter 3. Separating your identity from others' behavior. Let me ask you something that might catch you off guard. Who are you when no one is watching? Not who you perform as at work. Not who you become around your family. Not the version of you that shows up on social media. Who are you when every audience is gone and there is nothing left but you and your own reflection? If that question feels difficult to answer, there is a reason. And it is not because you lack identity. It is because, for most of your life, your sense of self has been quietly shaped by how other people respond to you. Think about how this works in everyday life. Someone speaks to you warmly, and you walk away feeling good about yourself. Someone ignores your message, and suddenly there is a heaviness in your chest that was not there 5 minutes ago. Someone chooses you, includes you, prioritizes you, and you feel like you matter. Someone overlooks you, cancels on you, or pulls away, and something inside whispers that maybe you are not as important as you thought. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever had a perfectly fine day, felt steady and confident, and then one interaction, one shift in someone's energy completely changed how you felt about yourself? That is not a small thing. That is a signal that your identity has become entangled with other people's behavior. And when that happens, you are essentially living on emotional quicksand. Every step feels stable until someone moves, and then everything sinks. Here is how this pattern usually develops. When you were young, the people around you became your first mirrors. You looked at how they reacted to you and drew conclusions about who you were. If they smiled, you decided you were lovable. If they frowned, you decided something was wrong with you. If they paid attention, you felt significant. If they looked away, you felt invisible. At that age, this made sense. You were a child. You did not have the capacity to define yourself independently. So you used the only data available, other people's reactions. But here is the problem. Most of us never updated that system. We grew up. We became adults. We built careers. We traveled. We learned things. We gained experience. But deep underneath all of that growth, that same childhood operating system is still running. We are still looking at other people's faces to figure out who we are. And the faces keep changing. That is what makes this so exhausting. Imagine trying to read a book, but every few seconds someone rips out the page you're on and replaces it with a different one. You would never finish a single chapter. You would never get a coherent story. That is what happens when you try to build your identity through other people's reactions. The story of who you are keeps getting rewritten by forces outside your control. Someone is enthusiastic about you, and the page says, "You are amazing." Someone becomes distant, and the page says, "You are not enough." Someone praises your work, and the page says, "You are talented." Someone criticizes you, and the page says, "You are a fraud." Back and forth, every single day. No wonder so many people feel lost. Not because they lack qualities or depth or value, but because they have never been allowed to hold their own page long enough to actually read it. Let me give you a real scenario. Imagine you spend weeks working on something that matters to you. Maybe it is a creative project. Maybe it is a proposal at work. Maybe it is something personal you poured your energy into. You share it with someone whose opinion you respect, and their response is lukewarm. Not cruel, not dismissive, just underwhelming. A quick, nice, and they move on. What happens inside you? If your identity is tied to external reactions, that lukewarm response does not just feel like feedback on your work. It feels like feedback on you. Your mind does not say, "They did not connect with this particular thing." Your mind says, "I am not good enough." The project becomes you. The reaction becomes your worth. But think about this for a moment. What if that person was distracted? What if they were dealing with something heavy that day? What if they simply did not understand what they were looking at? What if their reaction had absolutely nothing to do with the quality of what you created and everything to do with where they were emotionally in that moment? You see, other people's behavior is almost never a pure reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their mood, their capacity, their fears, their priorities, their attention span, and 100 other variables that have nothing to do with you. Someone snaps at you not because you are annoying, but because they slept 3 hours last night and their patience is gone. Someone does not call you back, not because you do not matter, but because they are drowning in their own stress. Someone pulls away, not because you failed, but because they are dealing with something they do not know how to talk about. Has that ever happened to you? You assumed someone's distance was about you, and then later found out they were going through something completely unrelated? When you use other people as mirrors to determine your worth, you are trusting a mirror that changes shape every few seconds. Sometimes it makes you look 10 feet tall. Sometimes it makes you look invisible. But the mirror was never accurate. It was always distorted by whatever the other person was carrying that day. So, what does it look like to separate your identity from external reactions? It starts with a simple but powerful internal shift. Instead of automatically translating someone's behavior into a statement about your worth, you pause. You create a gap between what happened and what you conclude. Someone is cold toward you. Old pattern says, I did something wrong. I am not enough. New pattern says, they seem off today. I wonder what is going on with them. Same situation, completely different internal experience. Someone criticizes your work. Old pattern says, I am a failure. New pattern says, let me look at this honestly. Is there something useful here, or is this more about their perspective than my ability? Same feedback, entirely different emotional impact. This pause, this tiny space between stimulus and interpretation, is where your power lives, and the more you practice it, the wider that space becomes. Eventually, you stop taking everything personally, not because you stop caring, but because you understand that most of what people do is about them, not about you. And here is what is really beautiful about this shift. When you stop filtering your identity through other people's behavior, you finally get to meet yourself. The real you. Not the version that performs for approval, not the version that shrinks to avoid rejection, not the version that shapeshifts depending on who is in the room, the version that exists underneath all of that noise. You start discovering what you actually think, not what you think others want you to think. You start recognizing what you actually value, not what you adopted to fit in. You start feeling your own presence in a way that does not need constant external confirmation. And from that place, something shifts in your relationships too. You stop clinging, not because you care less, but because your sense of self is no longer at stake in every interaction. You can love someone deeply without needing them to constantly prove that you are worthy of love. You can appreciate someone's presence without collapsing when they are absent. You can hear criticism without interpreting it as a death sentence on your identity. You become more consistent, more grounded, more yourself. Not the version of yourself that fluctuates with every text message, every tone shift, every raised eyebrow. The version that remains steady, because it is built on something internal rather than something borrowed. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who seems calm no matter what is happening around them? Someone who does not get rattled by criticism or inflated by praise? Someone who just seems comfortable in their own skin regardless of the room they are in. That is not a personality trait people are born with. That is a skill that is built through exactly this process. Through learning to separate who you are from how people respond to you. Through choosing again and again to define yourself from the inside rather than letting the outside do it for you. And I want to be clear about something. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about shutting down or not caring what anyone thinks. That is not strength. That is just a different form of self-protection. What we are talking about is something much more nuanced. It is the ability to care about people, to value their perspective, to remain open and connected, while simultaneously knowing that their behavior does not write your story. You hold the pen. You always did. You just forgot for a while because the world kept handing it to other people. It is time to take it back. And once you do, once your identity is rooted in something that does not shift with every external breeze, you will experience a kind of confidence that most people never find. Not loud confidence, not the kind that needs applause, the quiet kind, the kind that stays with you in empty rooms, the kind that does not flinch when someone misunderstands you, the kind that lets you say, with real peace in your chest, I know who I am, and I do not need you to agree for it to be true. That is the kind of confidence we are building here, and it starts with one decision: to stop handing your identity to people who were never supposed to carry it. Chapter 4. Developing Emotional Self-Regulation. Let me paint a picture for you. You are having a normal day. Nothing special, nothing terrible. You are going about your routine, feeling relatively okay, and then your phone buzzes. You look down and see a message from someone you care about, but the tone feels off. It is shorter than usual. No warmth, no emoji, just a few flat words. Now, logically, you know there could be 1,000 explanations. They are busy, they are tired, they are in the middle of something. Maybe they typed it while walking and did not think twice about how it landed. But your body does not care about logic in that moment. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts running. What did I do? Are they upset with me? Did something change? And within seconds, your entire emotional state has shifted. Not because something actually happened, but because your mind created a story and your body believed it. Has that ever happened to you? One short text, one change in tone, one unreturned call, and suddenly your whole day feels different. If so, you are not broken. You are not overly sensitive. You are simply experiencing what happens when your emotional system has not been trained to regulate itself. And the truth is, most people were never taught this skill. We were taught math. We were taught grammar. We were taught how to drive and how to file taxes. But nobody ever sat us down and said, here's how to manage what happens inside you when the world does not behave the way you expect. So let us talk about that, because this might be the most important skill you ever develop. Here's something that changes everything once you truly understand it. Your emotions are not caused by other people. I know that sounds wrong. I know it feels like someone else's behavior directly creates what you feel. But that is not actually how it works. What really happens is this. Someone does something. Your mind interprets it, and that interpretation creates the emotion. The behavior is just the trigger. The thought is the engine, and the emotion is the output. Let me break that down with an example. Someone cancels plans with you last minute. If your mind interprets that as, they do not value my time, you feel disrespected and angry. If your mind interprets it as, something must have come up, I hope they are okay, you feel understanding and calm. Same event. Completely different emotional experience. The only thing that changed was the thought in between. This is not just a nice theory. This is the actual mechanics of how your inner world operates. And once you see it clearly, you realize something both humbling and empowering. You have far more influence over your emotional state than you ever believed. Now, I am not saying you can control your emotions like a light switch. That is not realistic, And honestly, that is not even the goal. Emotions are natural. They are human. They carry important information. The goal is not to eliminate them. The goal is to stop being controlled by them. There is a huge difference between feeling an emotion and being hijacked by it. Feeling hurt when someone is dismissive is normal. Spiraling into 3 hours of overthinking, replaying every interaction, and convincing yourself that you are fundamentally unlovable is being hijacked. Feeling disappointed when plans fall through is normal. Sending 5 anxious texts demanding an explanation is being hijacked. Can you feel the difference? One is the emotion itself. The other is the emotion running your entire operating system with no supervision. Emotional self-regulation is basically learning to be the supervisor. It is learning to feel the emotion, acknowledge it, and then choose your response instead of letting the emotion choose for you. So, how do you actually do this? Let me walk you through it practically, because this is not something that should stay theoretical. This needs to live in your daily life. The first tool is the pause. This sounds almost too simple, but it is incredibly powerful. When you feel a strong emotional reaction rising, whether it is anxiety, anger, hurt, or insecurity, do not act on it immediately. Just pause. Even 5 seconds changes things. In those 5 seconds, you create a gap between the trigger and your response. And in that gap, you have choice. Without the pause, you are on autopilot. Your emotional wiring from childhood, from past relationships, from old wounds, it all fires automatically. But the pause interrupts that automation. It gives your conscious mind a chance to step in. The second tool is body awareness. This one surprises most people because we tend to think of emotions as purely mental. But emotions live in your body just as much as they live in your mind. Next time you feel a strong reaction, instead of immediately analyzing the situation, drop your attention into your body. Where do you feel it? Is your jaw clenched? Is your stomach tight? Are your shoulders creeping up toward your ears? Is your breathing shallow and fast? Just noticing these physical sensations does something remarkable. It pulls you out of the mental spiral and into the present moment. Your body can only exist right now. It cannot live in the future worry or the past regret that your mind is spinning. So when you shift attention to physical sensation, you anchor yourself in the present. And from the present, things almost always look more manageable than they do from inside a spiral. The third tool is breath. And I know you have probably heard just breathe 1,000 times, and it feels almost dismissive at this point. But hear me out. Your breath is the one part of your nervous system you can consciously control. When you slow your exhale, when you breathe out longer than you breathe in, you send a direct signal to your nervous system that you are safe. Not conceptually safe, physiologically safe. Your heart rate drops. Your muscles begin to release. Your mind slows down. Try it right now if you can. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Breathe out for 6. Do that 3 times. Notice what shifts. That is not a trick. That is biology, and it is available to you in every single moment of emotional turbulence. Before you send that reactive text, before you snap at someone, before you spiral into overthinking, breathe first. Regulate your body, then decide what to do. The fourth tool is questioning your thoughts. This is where things get really transformative. Remember what we said earlier. Your emotions are driven by interpretation, not events. So when you feel a strong emotional reaction, ask yourself what thought is creating it. Someone did not text you back. The thought might be, they are losing interest in me. Okay, now question it. Is that definitely true? Is there any other possible explanation? Have they ever been slow to respond before for reasons that had nothing to do with you? Is it possible that this moment says nothing about your worth and everything about their schedule? You are not trying to talk yourself out of feelings. You are trying to loosen the grip of automatic interpretations that may not even be accurate. Because here is the thing, your mind presents its first interpretation as fact. It does not say, here is one possible explanation. It says, this is what is happening, with absolute certainty. But that certainty is an illusion. Your first thought is almost never the full picture. It is just the loudest voice in the room. Have you ever been completely convinced that someone was upset with you, built an entire case in your head about why, and then found out they had no idea what you were talking about? That they were fine the whole time, and you spent hours suffering over a story that existed nowhere but in your own mind? That is what unregulated interpretation does. It builds courtrooms inside your head, puts you on trial, and delivers a guilty verdict before any actual evidence has been examined. Emotional self-regulation is learning to dismiss that court, or at the very least, learning to demand better evidence before accepting the verdict. Now, there is another layer to this that I think is really important to talk about, and it is the willingness to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it. Most people treat uncomfortable emotions like emergencies. Anxiety shows up, and they immediately reach for their phone to text someone who might calm them down. Loneliness hits, and they scroll through social media looking for some form of connection. Insecurity surfaces, and they fish for a compliment to temporarily soothe it. And I get it. Those strategies work in the short term. They take the edge off. But they also prevent you from building the one thing that would actually change your life long term, which is the deep internal knowing that you can handle difficult feelings on your own. Every time you outsource your emotional regulation to someone else, you are sending yourself a subtle but powerful message. That message is, I cannot handle this alone. I need someone else to make me okay. And the more you send that message, the more you believe it. The more you believe it, the more dependent you become. And the more dependent you become, the more fragile your emotional world gets. But what if you did the opposite? What if the next time anxiety hit, instead of immediately reaching out, you sat with it for 10 minutes? Just 10 minutes. Not fighting it, not analyzing it, just letting it be there while you breathe through it. What if the next time loneliness showed up, instead of grabbing your phone, you let yourself feel it fully? Let it wash through you like a wave, and then noticed that after a few minutes, it started to soften on its own? What if the next time insecurity whispered, you are not enough, instead of desperately seeking proof that you are, you just acknowledged the thought, let it sit there, and chose not to act on it? Each time you do that, something extraordinary happens underneath the surface. You build self-trust. You prove to yourself that you can weather emotional storms without outside rescue. And that proof accumulates. It stacks. It compounds over time until one day you realize that your emotional stability is no longer dependent on anyone else's behavior. That does not mean you never reach out. That does not mean you stop leaning on people you trust. Connection is beautiful and important. But there is a world of difference between choosing to share your feelings with someone and needing someone to regulate them for you. One is intimacy. The other is dependency. When you develop real emotional self-regulation, your entire life changes in ways you might not expect. Small things stop ruining your day. A delayed response becomes just a delayed response, not a crisis. A disagreement becomes just a disagreement, not an existential threat. A bad mood from someone else becomes their bad mood, not your emergency to fix. You start responding to life instead of reacting to it. And that shift from reactive to responsive is one of the clearest signs that you are growing into the kind of person who does not need anyone else to feel okay. Not because you have become cold, but because you have become capable. And that capability, that quiet inner strength that lets you meet life on its terms without falling apart, that is something no one can ever take from you. It is yours. You build it, and it will carry you through things that used to destroy you. That is the power of learning to regulate yourself. And once you have it, you will wonder how you ever lived without it. Chapter 5. Transforming Solitude into Strength. Let me tell you about a moment that most people experience but rarely talk about. It is a Friday evening. Your phone is quiet, no plans, no invitations, no one reaching out. The apartment is still. The world outside seems to be moving without you. And in that stillness, a thought creeps in, one that is hard to shake. Why is no one thinking of me right now? Have you felt that before? That specific kind of quiet that does not feel peaceful, but feels personal. Like the silence is not just the absence of noise, but the absence of proof that you matter? If you have, I want you to know something. That feeling is not telling you the truth. It feels like truth. It sounds like truth. It shows up wearing the costume of truth. But it is not. It is a story that your mind has learned to tell in the absence of external stimulation. And today, we are going to rewrite that story, because solitude is not what most people think it is. It is not a waiting room. It is not a punishment. It is not the space between one relationship and the next. Solitude, when you learn to use it, is one of the most powerful tools for personal transformation that exists, but only if you stop running from it long enough to discover what it is actually offering you. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you were alone and felt genuinely good about it? Not distracted, not numbing yourself with content, not counting the hours until someone was available, actually at peace with your own company. If you cannot remember, that is okay. Most people cannot. And the reason is not that solitude is inherently unpleasant. The reason is that we have been conditioned from a very young age to associate being alone with being unwanted. Think about how this conditioning works. In school, the kid sitting alone at lunch was the one people felt sorry for. In social settings, the person standing by themselves at a party was assumed to be awkward or rejected. On social media, a Friday night alone is something people hide, while a crowded dinner table is something people broadcast. The message has been drilled into us from every direction. Being surrounded by people means you are valued. Being alone means something went wrong. But here is what nobody told you. Some of the most important growth you will ever experience happens in the exact moments when no one else is around. Not in the crowded rooms, not in the busy social calendars, not in the group chats, in the quiet, in the empty spaces, in the moments that feel like nothing is happening. Because when you are constantly surrounded by others, something subtle happens that most people never notice. You start adjusting. You soften your opinions to match the room. You laugh at things that are not actually funny to you. You hold back thoughts that might create friction. You present the version of yourself that gets the smoothest response rather than the version that is most honest. And over time, those adjustments accumulate, layer after layer after layer, until one day you are standing in front of your own life and you genuinely do not know which parts are yours and which parts were built to keep other people comfortable. Has that ever hit you? That strange moment where someone asks you what you actually want, and you realize you do not have a clear answer. Not because you are indecisive, but because you have spent so long calibrating yourself to others that your own signal got buried under all the noise. That is what happens when you never give yourself space. Your own voice gets drowned out, and you cannot hear it again until you create enough quiet for it to reach you. This is what solitude offers. It is not emptiness. It is a clearing. It is the space where you get to hear yourself think without interference, where you get to feel what you actually feel without performing it for an audience, where you get to sit with your own preferences, your own values, your own instincts, without running them through the filter of, but what will they think? And I will be honest with you, the first stretch of intentional solitude can feel terrible. Your mind will resist it. It will tell you that you are wasting time. It will tell you that you should be out there, connecting, networking, being seen. It will tell you that choosing to be alone is the same as admitting defeat. But that voice is not wisdom. That voice is conditioning. And conditioning can be unlearned. Think about physical exercise for a moment. The first time you go to the gym after a long break, everything hurts. Your muscles burn. Your body protests. Every part of you wants to stop. But if you keep showing up, something shifts. The pain decreases. Strength builds. What once felt impossible becomes routine. And eventually, you start craving the very thing that used to feel like punishment. Solitude works the same way. The first few times you sit alone intentionally, your mind will scream for stimulation. It will want to scroll, text, call, watch, listen, anything but be still. But if you stay with it, if you keep showing up to those quiet moments, the resistance fades. And what replaces it is something you might not expect. Clarity. Real, honest, unfiltered clarity about who you are and what you actually want from your life. In solitude, you start hearing things you could not hear before. You notice which goals actually excite you versus which ones you adopted because they would impress someone. You notice which relationships energize you versus which ones you maintain out of obligation or fear. You notice which habits are serving you versus which ones are just filling time. That kind of clarity is impossible when you are constantly plugged into other people's frequencies. You need to tune into your own station first, and that requires stepping away from the noise. Now, I want to address something important here because I think a lot of people misunderstand what it means to embrace solitude. It does not mean becoming a hermit. It does not mean canceling all your plans and sitting in a dark room. It does not mean rejecting people or deciding that relationships are not worth having. What it means is this: you learn to be with yourself so comfortably that connection becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. You spend time alone not because you have to, but because you recognize its value. And when you do connect with others, you show up differently. You show up fuller, more present, more honest, more grounded, because you are not arriving empty, hoping they will fill you up. You are arriving already whole, ready to share rather than take. Can you feel the difference between those two? Showing up to a friendship or a relationship from emptiness versus showing up from fullness. One is heavy, one is light. One creates pressure, one creates freedom. One says, I need you to make me okay. The other says, I am already okay, and I choose to be here with you. That is what solitude teaches you, how to show up from overflow instead of deficit. There is also something else that happens in solitude that most people overlook entirely: creativity. Some of the most meaningful ideas, insights, and breakthroughs you will ever have do not come from brainstorming sessions or crowded coffee shops. They come from quiet moments where your mind has space to wander freely, where it is not responding to input but generating its own output. Think about when your best ideas tend to arrive: in the shower, on a long walk, lying in bed before sleep. What do all those moments have in common? Low stimulation, minimal distraction, space. Your brain does its deepest work when it is not being constantly fed. Solitude creates the conditions for that deep work to happen. And beyond creativity, solitude builds something even more essential: emotional independence. When you know, from direct experience, that you can spend an evening alone and feel okay, something inside you relaxes. The fear of abandonment loosens. The panic around rejection softens. Because you have proven to yourself through practice that being alone is not the catastrophe your conditioning told you it was. If someone leaves your life, you feel the sadness. Of course you do. You are human. But you do not collapse, because you have spent enough time in your own company to know that you can stand on your own. If plans get canceled at the last minute, you do not spiral into feeling unwanted. You adjust. You find something meaningful to do with that time. You might even enjoy it. That resilience does not come from reading about solitude. It comes from living it, from choosing it repeatedly until your nervous system updates its old programming and learns that alone does not equal abandoned. Let me ask you one more thing before we move on. What if you started treating solitude not as something that happens to you, but as something you gift to yourself? What if instead of dreading quiet evenings, you started protecting them? What if you blocked off time in your week specifically for being alone, not as loneliness, but as investment? Because here is what I have seen happen again and again. The people who learn to be powerful in solitude become magnetic in company, not because they perform better, but because they no longer perform at all. They just are. And that authenticity, that groundedness, that quiet confidence that comes from someone who is genuinely comfortable with themselves, it draws people in naturally. You do not become less connected by embracing solitude. You become better connected, because for the first time, you are connecting from a place of strength rather than need. And connection built on strength is the only kind that truly lasts. Solitude is not your exile. It is your training ground, and every minute you spend there building your relationship with yourself, investing in your own inner world, learning to enjoy the quiet instead of fearing it. Every one of those minutes is making you stronger in ways you cannot yet fully see. But you will feel it. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but there will come a moment when you are alone, truly alone, and instead of that old familiar ache of something is missing, you will feel something entirely different. You will feel full, present, complete. And in that moment, you will understand that solitude was never the problem. It was always the preparation. Chapter 6. Creating Daily Habits that Strengthen Your Inner Peace. Let me ask you something that might seem unrelated to everything we have been talking about, but trust me, it is at the center of it all. What does the first hour of your day look like? Not what you wish it looked like, not what you tell people it looks like. What actually happens between the moment your eyes open and the moment you step into the world? Because I am willing to bet that for most of you, it goes something like this. Alarm goes off, eyes half open, hand reaches for the phone before your brain is even fully online. You check messages, you scroll through notifications, you open social media, and within 60 seconds of being conscious, your emotional state has already been shaped by something external. A message that was not there makes you feel forgotten. A notification pulls you into someone else's drama. A post from someone living their best life makes you feel like you are falling behind, and your day has not even started yet. Does that sound like your morning? Be honest, because if it does, I need you to understand something critical. You are not just checking your phone. You are handing over the emotional remote control before you have even had a chance to decide how you want to feel today. You are letting the outside world program your inner world before your inner world has had a single moment to set its own tone. And then you wonder why you feel anxious by noon, why you feel drained by evening, why your mood seems to swing based on what is happening around you rather than what is happening inside you. This is not a character flaw. This is a habit. And the beautiful thing about habits is that they can be changed, not overnight, not with some dramatic overhaul, but with small, consistent, intentional shifts that compound over time into something genuinely transformative. Here is the thing about emotional stability that most self-help advice gets wrong. People talk about inner peace like it is a destination. Like one day you will arrive at some permanent state of calm and never feel disturbed again. That is not how it works. Inner peace is not a place you get to. It is something you practice daily through habits that either support your nervous system or sabotage it. Think of it like physical health. You do not go to the gym once and expect to be fit for the rest of your life. Fitness is maintained through daily choices. What you eat, how you move, how you sleep. Skip those choices for long enough and the fitness fades. Inner peace works exactly the same way. It is maintained through daily emotional habits. How you start your morning, how you talk to yourself, how you respond to stress, how you spend your time when no one is watching. So let us get practical, because understanding this conceptually is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. The morning matters more than you think. Those first few minutes after waking are not neutral. They are a window where your nervous system is especially receptive. Whatever you feed it in that window tends to set the emotional baseline for the rest of the day. Feed it anxiety and comparison first thing, and you are starting from a deficit. Feed it calm and intention, and you are starting from a position of strength. What would it look like to protect that window? It does not need to be complicated. You do not need a 90-minute spiritual ritual. Even 10 minutes of intentional quiet before engaging with the outside world can shift everything. You wake up. You keep the phone face down. You take a few deep breaths. You stretch your body, even gently. You ask yourself one simple question. How do I want to feel today? That question might seem small, but it is incredibly powerful. Because most people never ask it. They just react to whatever the day throws at them and then wonder why they feel out of control by the end of it. But when you set an intention, even a simple one like, I want to feel grounded today, or I want to respond calmly no matter what happens, you are giving your mind a direction. And a mind with direction behaves very differently than a mind on autopilot. Have you ever tried that? Just pausing in the morning, before anything else, and deciding how you want to show up that day? If not, I genuinely encourage you to try it tomorrow, not as some big commitment, just as an experiment. See what happens? Now let us talk about gratitude, and I promise I am not going to give you the generic advice you have heard 1,000 times. I am not going to tell you to write down 3 things you are grateful for and expect your life to change. What I am going to tell you is why gratitude actually works on a neurological level, and how to practice it in a way that is not performative, but genuinely shifts your emotional experience. Here is the basic problem. Your brain has a negativity bias. It is wired to scan for threats, for problems, for what is missing. This was useful thousands of years ago when survival depended on spotting danger quickly. But in modern life, this bias means your mind is constantly highlighting what is wrong while ignoring what is right. You could have 20 things going well in your life, but your brain will fixate on the 2 things that are not. Sound familiar? Gratitude is the antidote to that bias. Not because it pretends problems do not exist, but because it trains your brain to also notice what is working. And when your brain starts noticing sufficiency instead of only noticing lack, your emotional baseline shifts upward. You feel more stable, more grounded, more like life is working with you rather than against you. But here is the key. Gratitude has to be felt, not just listed. Writing, I am grateful for my health, while your mind is somewhere else, does nothing. But pausing for 30 seconds and genuinely feeling what it is like to have a body that carries you through each day, letting that sink in, letting your chest soften with that awareness that changes your internal chemistry. It is the feeling that matters, not the words. Can you try that right now? Think of one thing in your life that is working. Just one. And instead of just acknowledging it mentally, actually let yourself feel it for a few seconds. Feel the relief of it, the steadiness of it, the quiet goodness of it. That is gratitude. And when you practice it daily, not as a checklist, but as a genuine emotional exercise, it rewires how you perceive your life. Now let us talk about movement. And again, I am not talking about becoming a fitness influencer or training for a marathon. I am talking about the simple relationship between your body and your emotions that most people completely ignore. Your body stores emotion. This is not some abstract spiritual concept. It is physiology. When you are stressed, your muscles tighten. When you are anxious, your breathing becomes shallow. When you are carrying unresolved tension, it sits in your shoulders, your jaw, your lower back, your stomach. And when that physical tension accumulates without release, it feeds back into your emotional state. Your body tells your brain something is wrong, and your brain responds with more anxiety, more restlessness, more unease. Movement interrupts that cycle. When you walk, when you stretch, when you move your body in any way that feels natural, you release stored tension. You reset your nervous system. You create space for your mind to settle. You do not need to run 10 miles. A 20-minute walk outside, feeling the air on your skin, noticing the world around you, letting your body move at its own pace, that alone can shift your emotional state more than an hour of overthinking ever will. Your body was designed to move. When it does not, your emotions get stuck. When it does, things start flowing again. Have you ever noticed that? How a walk sometimes solves a problem that sitting and thinking about it for hours could not? That is not coincidence. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do when you give it the chance. Let us talk about one more habit that I think is quietly the most important of all: the way you speak to yourself. If someone followed you around all day and said to you the things you say to yourself inside your head, how long would you tolerate it? Seriously, think about the commentary that runs through your mind, the criticisms after a mistake, the harsh judgment when you fall short, the impatient, unforgiving tone when you do not meet your own expectations. If a friend spoke to you like that, you would distance yourself from them. If a partner spoke to you like that, you would call it toxic. But when that voice comes from inside your own head, you accept it as normal. You might even believe it is motivating you. It is not. Harsh self-talk does not build strength. It erodes it. Every time you tear yourself down internally, you are chipping away at the foundation we have been building together through this entire conversation. You cannot cultivate inner peace while waging war against yourself. So here is the shift. Start noticing what you say to yourself, especially in moments of difficulty. When you make a mistake, is your first internal response, "Of course I messed up, I always do," or is it, "That did not go well, what can I learn from it?" When you feel insecure, does your inner voice pile on with, "You are not enough and everyone knows it"? Or does it offer something gentler, like, "This is hard right now, but it will pass"? The voice you cultivate inside your own mind is the voice you will hear the most in your lifetime, more than any friend, more than any partner, more than any parent or mentor. You will spend more time with your own self-talk than with any other voice on earth. So, it matters deeply what that voice sounds like. I am not asking you to fake positivity. I am asking you to speak to yourself with the same patience and compassion you would offer someone you love. When they struggle, you do not destroy them with criticism. You offer understanding. You offer encouragement. You offer perspective. You deserve that same treatment from yourself. Now here is what ties all of this together. None of these habits are dramatic. None of them require extreme effort. A quiet morning, a moment of gratitude, some movement, kinder self-talk. These are not revolutionary concepts, but practiced consistently day after day, they create something that no single event, no relationship, no external achievement can give you. They create a stable emotional foundation that belongs entirely to you. When your habits support your nervous system supports your peace. When your peace is internally maintained, you stop looking for other people to provide it. And when you stop looking for other people to provide it, everything in your life, your relationships, your work, your sense of self, gets lighter. This is not about perfection. There will be mornings where you grab your phone first thing. There will be days where your self-talk is harsh. There will be weeks where you skip movement and forget to pause. That is fine. That is human. The goal is not a flawless routine. The goal is a general direction, a daily leaning toward habits that strengthen you rather than deplete you. And over time, that leaning becomes your new normal. You wake up feeling steadier, not because something amazing happened, but because your daily practices have quietly reinforced your foundation. You move through difficult moments with more grace, not because you have become superhuman, but because your nervous system has been supported so consistently that it can handle the weight. That is the power of daily habits, not in any single day, but in the accumulation of hundreds of days where you chose yourself quietly, consistently, without applause. Those days are where real transformation lives. And if I could ask you to take just one thing from this chapter, it would be this. Do not wait for a perfect morning routine. Do not wait until you have it all figured out. Just start with one small thing tomorrow. One moment of intention before the phone comes on. One breath before the world rushes in. One kinder sentence when the inner critic starts talking. That one small thing repeated will change your life more than any single event ever could. I promise you that. Chapter 7. Becoming whole before anyone arrives. There is a sentence that gets repeated so often in movies, in songs, and late-night conversations that most people have absorbed it as truth without ever questioning it. You complete me. It sounds beautiful. It sounds romantic. It sounds like the ultimate declaration of love. But if you sit with it long enough, if you really let yourself examine what it is actually saying, you will notice something unsettling underneath the poetry. It is saying that without another person, you are incomplete. And that idea, as harmless as it sounds wrapped in a love story, has quietly caused more emotional suffering than most people will ever realize. Have you ever caught yourself thinking that way? Maybe not in those exact words, but in the feeling behind them. That quiet sense that something is missing. That subtle belief that once the right person shows up, once they choose you and stay, then you will finally feel whole. Then the restlessness will settle. Then the emptiness will fill. Then you will be okay. Be honest with yourself right now. Is there a part of you, even a small part, that is still waiting for someone to arrive and make everything feel complete? If so, I understand. I genuinely do. That belief was planted in most of us before we were old enough to question it. Every fairy tale ended with the same message. Every romantic movie delivered the same conclusion. Every love song repeated the same idea from different angles. Happiness is found in another person. Wholeness is found in being chosen. Your life truly begins when someone shows up and decides you are worth staying for. The problem is not that relationships are bad. They are not. Connection is one of the most beautiful parts of being alive. The problem is what happens when you believe your wholeness depends on it, because that belief does not just sit quietly in the background. It actively shapes your behavior in ways that erode the very thing you are looking for. Let me show you what I mean. When you believe someone else completes you, you start living with a hidden fear that most people never name out loud. The fear of losing them, not just the natural sadness that comes with losing someone you love, something deeper, a terror. Because if they complete you, then losing them does not just mean losing a relationship. It means losing a part of yourself. It means going back to being incomplete. It means returning to that emptiness you were trying to escape. And that fear changes how you move through the relationship. You might start over giving, not from generosity, but from anxiety. You pour everything into the other person, hoping that if you give enough, they will not leave. You might start silencing yourself, swallowing your opinions, hiding your needs, avoiding any friction, because what if they do not like the real you? What if the authentic version of you is not enough to make them stay? Have you ever done that? Bitten your tongue when you wanted to speak? Agreed when you wanted to disagree? Tolerated something that crossed your boundaries because the thought of being alone again felt worse than the discomfort of staying? That is not love. I know it feels like love. I know it wears the same clothes as love. But that is fear dressed up in devotion. And fear-based connection always costs you something essential. It costs you yourself. Here is what I wish someone had told me years ago, and what I want to tell you right now with as much sincerity as I can put into words. You were whole before anyone entered your life. Your personality, your mind, your humor, your depth, your sensitivity, your strength, your creativity, your ability to feel deeply and think clearly, all of that existed before any relationship. All of that belongs to you independently. A partner can add to your life. They can bring joy, companionship, laughter, shared experiences. But they do not create your identity. They do not manufacture your worth. They do not install the missing piece that makes you finally good enough. Because there is no missing piece. There never was. The emptiness you sometimes feel is not evidence that you need someone to fill it. It is evidence that you have not yet fully reconnected with what was already there. It is not a hole that another person can plug. It is a signal that you have been looking outward for something that only exists inward. Now I know that sounds nice as a concept, but living it is a completely different challenge. So let me walk through what becoming whole actually looks like in practice. Because it is not just a mindset shift. It is a series of choices you make daily until wholeness becomes your lived experience rather than just an idea you agree with. The first part is self-acceptance. And I do not mean the filtered, curated version of self-acceptance you see on Instagram posts. I mean the raw, uncomfortable, honest kind. The kind where you look at every part of yourself, the parts you're proud of and the parts you hide from everyone, and you say, "This is me, all of it, and I am not going to war with myself anymore." Most people who are searching for someone to complete them are actually searching for someone who will accept the parts they have rejected in themselves. They want someone to look at their flaws and say, "I love you anyway." And there is nothing wrong with wanting that. But here is the catch. If you cannot offer yourself that acceptance first, no amount of external validation will ever feel like enough. Someone can tell you they love you every single day, and if deep down you do not believe you are lovable, Their words will bounce off you like rain on a window. You will hear them, but you will not absorb them. Self-acceptance is not about thinking you are perfect. It is about making peace with the reality that you are not. It is about understanding that being human includes flaws, mistakes, awkwardness, and a whole catalog of things you wish were different about yourself. And choosing, despite all of that, to treat yourself with basic kindness rather than constant punishment. Have you ever been around someone who is genuinely at peace with who they are? Not arrogant, not performing, just settled, comfortable. They do not need to prove anything. They do not need to impress anyone. They laugh at their own mistakes instead of spiraling over them. They admit what they do not know without feeling ashamed. They take up space without apologizing for it. There is something almost magnetic about that energy. And it does not come from external validation. It comes from a person who has done the inner work of accepting themselves fully. That is available to you, not after you lose the weight, not after you get the promotion, not after someone chooses you, right now, as you are, with everything you carry. The second part of becoming whole is building a sense of purpose that is not dependent on any single person. This is huge, and most people miss it entirely. When your entire sense of meaning revolves around a relationship, your world becomes dangerously small. If that person is happy, your world feels bright. If they are distant, your world feels dark. If they leave, your world collapses, not because life actually ended, but because you built your entire sense of direction around one human being. Purpose is what expands your world beyond any single relationship. And purpose does not have to be some grand world-changing mission. It can be a craft you are developing, a skill you are deepening, a community you are contributing to, a creative project you care about, a version of yourself you are actively building toward. When you have something meaningful to pour your energy into beyond another person, you become multidimensional. Your happiness has multiple roots instead of just one. And when happiness has multiple roots, pulling one out does not kill the whole tree. What is something you care about that has nothing to do with another person? Something that makes you feel alive, engaged, purposeful? If you have an answer, lean into it harder. If you do not have one yet, that is one of the most important searches you could embark on right now. Not a search for a partner, a search for purpose. The third part of becoming whole is becoming genuinely comfortable alone. We covered this earlier, but it bears repeating in this context because of how directly it connects to the "you complete me" trap. If being alone terrifies you, you will always be vulnerable to settling for less than you deserve just to avoid that fear. You will stay in situations that drain you. You will tolerate behavior that disrespects you. You will shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, all because the alternative, standing on your own, feels too frightening. But when you have built that comfort, when you know from lived experience that being alone is not the same as being broken, everything changes. You stop clinging to people who do not treat you well. You stop performing for approval that should not require a performance. You stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You start choosing relationships from a place of genuine desire rather than desperate need. And that is when love actually becomes what it was always supposed to be. Not two incomplete people trying to fill each other's gaps. Two whole people choosing to share their already full lives. There is something else I want to address here because I think it is a fear that stops many people from doing this work. Some people worry that if they become whole on their own, they will not need anyone, and then they will end up alone forever. As if neediness is what attracts love, as if desperation is what keeps people close. But the opposite is true. Neediness does not attract love. It attracts dependency. Desperation does not create connection. It creates pressure. When you show up to a relationship whole, you are not pushing people away. You are inviting a healthier kind of connection, the kind where both people have chosen to be there rather than needing to be there, the kind where love is given freely rather than extracted through fear, the kind that feels light rather than heavy. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were constantly trying to earn the other person's presence? Where you were always one wrong move away from losing them? That weight, that constant vigilance, that is what happens when two people enter a relationship from incompleteness. Every interaction carries the hidden pressure of, "Please do not leave because I do not know who I am without you." Now imagine the opposite. Two people who genuinely enjoy each other's company, but do not need each other to function. They support each other, they care deeply, they share their lives. But if one of them needs space, the other does not panic. If one of them has a bad day and is not their best self, the other does not interpret it as a threat. There is room to breathe, room to be imperfect, room to be human. That is what wholeness creates, not isolation, not emotional walls, space, healthy, loving, sustainable space. So here is what I want to leave you with before we move on. You do not need to wait for someone to arrive to start feeling whole. You do not need permission from another person to feel valuable. You do not need to be chosen to be worthy. You are not half of anything. You are a complete human being who has been carrying everything you need inside you this entire time. The work is not about adding something from the outside. The work is about uncovering what has been inside all along, buried under years of conditioning that told you it was not there. It is there. I promise you. And the moment you stop looking for someone else to show it to you and start looking for it yourself, you will find it. Not because anything changed in your external world, but because you finally turned inward and recognized what was always waiting for you. Your wholeness is not a future event. It is a present truth. And the sooner you live from that truth, the sooner everything, your relationships, your confidence, your peace, begins to transform. Chapter 8. Living from Inner Sufficiency instead of emotional need. There is a shift that happens in a person's life that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it yet. It is not loud. Nobody throws a parade for it. Your phone does not buzz with congratulations. From the outside, nothing looks different. But on the inside, everything has changed. It is the moment you stop living from emotional need and start living from inner sufficiency. And I want to be very careful with how I explain this, because it is easy to misunderstand. This is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about pretending you do not care. It is not about building walls around your heart and calling it strength. That is not sufficiency. That is just fear wearing armor. Inner sufficiency is something much quieter and much more powerful than that. It is the deep, calm knowing that you are okay. Not because everything in your life is perfect, not because everyone around you is behaving exactly the way you want them to, but because your sense of stability is no longer dependent on any of that. Let me ask you something. Right now, in this moment, if everyone in your life suddenly became unavailable for a week, no calls, no texts, no interaction at all, how would you feel? Not how do you think you should feel? How would you actually feel in your body, in your chest, in your gut? Would there be panic? Would there be a creeping sense of worthlessness? Would you feel like something essential had been taken from you? Or would you feel steady, uncomfortable maybe, but fundamentally okay? Your honest answer to that question tells you exactly where you are on the spectrum between emotional need and inner sufficiency. And wherever you are, there is no judgment. This is not a test you pass or fail. It is a map showing you where the work is. Most people live from emotional need without ever naming it. And the reason they do not name it is because it feels so normal. It feels like just being human. You need reassurance, so you seek it. You need attention, so you pursue it. You need proof that you matter, so you scan for it in every interaction. This pattern runs constantly, like an app in the background of your phone that you forgot was open, quietly draining your battery all day long. Think about what that actually looks like in daily life. You send a message and then monitor when they read it. You share something vulnerable and then measure their response to determine if it was safe to open up. You do something kind for someone and then quietly track whether they appreciated it enough. You enter a room and subconsciously assess whether people noticed you, whether they seem glad you are there, whether your presence registered. Have you done any of that recently? Not as a conscious choice, but as an automatic reflex. That monitoring, that constant scanning for evidence that you are valued, that is emotional need operating in the background. And it is exhausting, not because you are weak, but because you are running a program that was never supposed to handle your entire emotional operating system. Here is what makes emotional need so tricky. It disguises itself as connection. You think you are reaching out because you want to connect, but sometimes you are reaching out because you need to be soothed. You think you are being generous by giving so much in relationships, but sometimes you are giving because you are terrified of what happens if you stop. You think you are being loving by checking in constantly, but sometimes you are checking in because their response is the only thing standing between you and anxiety. I am not saying every act of reaching out is need-based. Of course not. Genuine connection is real and beautiful. But there is a line between connection and dependency. And most people have no idea which side of it they are on because they have never been taught to look. So what does inner sufficiency actually feel like? Let me try to describe it as honestly as I can. It feels like waking up in the morning and your first thought is not about who has contacted you. It feels like sitting in a quiet room and not needing to fill the silence with someone else's voice. It feels like hearing criticism and being able to sit with it calmly instead of immediately crumbling or defending. It feels like watching someone pull away and thinking, I hope they are okay, instead of, what did I do wrong? It feels like going through a difficult day and knowing in your bones that you have what it takes to get through it without being rescued. It feels like freedom, not freedom from people, freedom from the desperate need for people to behave a certain way in order for you to feel all right. Now, how do you actually get there? Because describing it is one thing, building it is another. The foundation of inner sufficiency is self-trust, and self-trust is not built through affirmations or motivational quotes. It is built through action, through keeping promises to yourself, through showing up for yourself the same way you wish others would show up for you. Let me give you a practical example. Say you tell yourself that starting tomorrow, you are going to wake up 30 minutes earlier and spend that time on something that matters to you. If you actually do it, something small but significant happens internally. A tiny deposit of trust gets made. Your subconscious registers that you are someone who follows through. Do it again the next day, and the deposit grows. Do it for a week, and something begins to shift. You start seeing yourself differently, not as someone who needs external motivation to function, but as someone who can rely on themselves. Now multiply that across different areas. You say you will set a boundary, and you actually hold it. Trust grows. You say you will stop tolerating a certain behavior, and you follow through. Trust grows. You say you will take care of your body, and you go for that walk even when you do not feel like it. Trust grows. Each of these actions is small on its own, but together they build something massive. They build the internal evidence that you can count on yourself. And when you know you can count on yourself, the frantic need to count on others begins to dissolve. Not because others become unimportant, but because they are no longer your only source of stability. Have you ever known someone who just seemed solid? Not cold, not detached, but steady. The kind of person who does not fall apart when plans change, who does not spiral when someone is inconsistent, who seems to carry their own ground with them wherever they go. That steadiness is not a personality trait they were born with. It is the result of accumulated self-trust built through hundreds of small moments where they showed up for themselves. That is available to you too. Starting today, starting with the next promise you make to yourself and actually keep. Another essential part of inner sufficiency is changing your relationship with loneliness. For most people, loneliness is interpreted as evidence that something is wrong, that they are unwanted, that they have failed socially, that they are somehow less than people who seem to be constantly surrounded. But loneliness, at its core, is just a feeling. It is not a verdict. It is not proof of anything. It is a sensation in your body, an experience in your mind that rises and falls like any other emotion. And when you stop treating it as an emergency that needs to be immediately fixed by someone else's presence, something remarkable happens. It loses its power over you. The next time you feel lonely, instead of reaching for your phone, try something different. Sit with it, not forever, not as punishment. Just for a few minutes, let it be there without running from it. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice what thoughts accompany it. And then ask yourself a simple question. Is this loneliness telling me that I am unwanted, or is it just telling me that I am alone right now? Because those are two very different things. Being alone right now is a temporary circumstance. Being unwanted is an identity judgment. And most of the time, loneliness tricks you into confusing the two. When you learn to sit with loneliness without letting it define you, you strip away one of the biggest drivers of emotional need. You discover that being alone does not destroy you, that the discomfort passes, that you can feel lonely and still be okay. That knowledge is power, real, practical, life-changing power. Inner sufficiency also transforms how you show up in relationships. And this is a part that I think surprises people the most because they expect that needing people less will make their relationships worse. But the opposite is true. When you live from emotional need, your relationships carry invisible weight. Every interaction has stakes. Every conversation has a hidden test embedded in it. Am I still important to you? Do you still care? Are you going to stay? That weight makes relationships heavy. It creates pressure that the other person can feel even if they cannot name it. And over time, that pressure pushes people away, which ironically confirms the very fear that created it. But when you live from sufficiency, that weight disappears. You show up lighter. You listen more because you are not anxiously waiting for your turn to be reassured. You give more freely because your giving is not a transaction designed to secure attachment. You communicate more honestly because you are not terrified that honesty might cost you the relationship. You allow space because you are not threatened by distance. And here is the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing people so much, they often come closer, not because you are playing some strategy, but because sufficiency is attractive. People feel safe around someone who is not constantly pulling at them for emotional sustenance. They feel free around someone who does not need them to behave perfectly in order to stay stable. That freedom creates the conditions for genuine intimacy, the kind that dependency can never produce. I want to talk about one more thing before we move forward: emotional responsibility. Because inner sufficiency is not just about feeling steady. It is about owning your emotional experience fully. Most people unconsciously assign responsibility for their emotions to others. If I feel hurt, it is because you did something hurtful. If I feel insecure, it is because you did not reassure me enough. If I feel anxious, it is because you are being inconsistent. And while other people's behavior absolutely influences how we feel, the responsibility for managing that feeling always comes back to us. Emotional responsibility means that when someone disappoints you, you allow yourself to feel the disappointment, but you do not hand them the job of fixing it. When someone misunderstands you, you clarify calmly, but you do not lose your entire sense of self because they got it wrong. When someone pulls away, you notice the discomfort, but you regulate it internally before deciding how to respond. This is not about letting people off the hook for bad behavior. It is about taking your power back. Because every time you assign someone else the responsibility of managing your emotions, you give them authority they did not ask for and cannot reliably exercise, and you make yourself dependent on their behavior for your stability. When you take that responsibility back, when you say, "I am in charge of how I feel and how I respond," everything shifts. You stop blaming. You stop waiting. You stop outsourcing your peace. You start managing your internal world with the same seriousness you would manage anything else that matters to you. And from that place of emotional responsibility, something profound emerges: dignity, a quiet, unshakable dignity that does not need to be defended because it is not under threat, a sense of self that remains intact whether someone is applauding you or ignoring you, a peace that does not waver based on whether someone texted back within the hour or not. That dignity is what inner sufficiency feels like when it has fully taken root. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. But everyone around you can feel it, and more importantly, you can feel it every morning when you wake up, every evening when you lay down. A quiet, steady hum of, I am okay, not because everything is perfect, but because I have built something inside me that does not depend on perfection. That is sufficiency, and it is not reserved for monks on mountaintops or people who have figured out every aspect of their lives. It is available to anyone willing to do the daily work of trusting themselves, sitting with discomfort, and choosing internal grounding over external chasing, including you, especially you. Chapter 9. Mastering Your Mind, so no one controls your peace. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine you are carrying a glass of water. The glass is full right to the brim, and you are walking through a crowded room. People are bumping into you. Someone steps on your foot. Someone nudges your elbow. And every time they do, water spills. Now here is the question. Who caused the water to spill? Your first instinct might be to say the people who bumped into you. But the real answer is different. The water spilled because that is what was in the glass. If the glass had been filled with something steadier, something more solid, the bumps would not have had the same effect. Your mind works the same way. When someone criticizes you and you spiral for hours, it is not just because of what they said. It is because of what was already inside you. When someone pulls away and your entire sense of self starts to wobble, it is not just because of their behavior. It is because your internal foundation was already unstable enough for that small shift to create a big earthquake. This is not about blaming yourself. Please hear that. This is about recognizing where your real power lives. You cannot control what other people do. You cannot control their moods, their tone, their decisions, their consistency. But you can control what fills your glass. You can control the internal landscape that determines how deeply external events affect you. That is what mastering your mind is about, and it might be the most important chapter in everything we have walked through together. Let me ask you something honestly. How much of your suffering over the past year was caused by actual events versus your mind's interpretation of those events? Think about it carefully. How many nights did you lose sleep not because something terrible happened, but because your mind created a story about what might happen? How many afternoons were ruined not by a real crisis, but by a tone in someone's voice that your brain decided meant something catastrophic? How many relationships were strained not by genuine conflict, but by assumptions your mind manufactured and then treated as fact? If you are being honest, the answer is probably a lot. And that is not a criticism. That is the human condition. Our minds are storytelling machines. They take incomplete information and fill in the gaps with narratives. And those narratives are almost always biased toward threat, toward worst-case scenarios, toward something is wrong and it is probably about me. Have you ever been absolutely certain that someone was upset with you? You analyzed their body language. You dissected their words. You built an entire case in your mind about what you did wrong and how they were probably reconsidering the entire relationship. And then you found out they had a headache, or they were stressed about work, or they were thinking about something that had absolutely nothing to do with you. All that suffering, all that mental energy, all that anxiety over a story that never existed anywhere but inside your own head. This is what an unmastered mind does. It takes a neutral event and turns it into a personal crisis. It takes silence and fills it with rejection. It takes distance and fills it with abandonment. It takes a short reply and fills it with proof that you are not enough. And the worst part is, it does all of this so quickly and so convincingly that you do not even realize it is happening. You think you are responding to reality, but you are responding to a projection of reality filtered through every fear and insecurity you have ever carried. So how do you break this pattern? How do you stop your mind from running wild with stories that drain your peace and hand control of your emotions to people who never asked for it? It starts with one fundamental understanding. Your thoughts are not facts. I know they feel like facts. I know that when your mind says they do not care about you, it feels as real and solid as the ground beneath your feet. But feelings of certainty and actual truth are not the same thing. Your mind can feel absolutely certain about something that is completely wrong. It does this all the time. And if you do not learn to question it, you will spend your life reacting to fiction while calling it reality. The practice is simple, but requires consistency. When you notice a strong emotional reaction, pause and identify the thought behind it, not the event. The thought, because the event is usually neutral. Someone did not reply. That is the event. They are losing interest in me, is the thought. Someone gave you critical feedback. That is the event. I am not good enough, is the thought. Someone canceled plans. That is the event. I am not a priority to anyone, is the thought. Do you see the gap? The event is just a thing that happened. The thought is the meaning your mind assigned to it. And that meaning is where all the emotional pain lives, not in the event itself, but in the interpretation layered on top of it. Once you identify the thought, question it. And I do not mean argue with it or try to force yourself to think positively. I mean genuinely examine it the way a detective would examine evidence. Is this thought definitely true? What is the actual evidence for it? Is there any evidence against it? Could there be an explanation I have not considered? Am I reacting to what is actually happening right now, or am I reacting to something from my past that this reminds me of? These questions do not make the emotion disappear instantly, but they do something even more valuable. They create distance between you and the thought, and in that distance, the thought loses its absolute authority. It goes from being a verdict to being a possibility, and a possibility is something you can work with. A verdict is something that pins you to the floor. Have you ever tried this in real time? In the middle of a spiral, have you ever stopped and asked yourself, wait, is this actually true, or is my mind doing that thing again? If you have, you know how powerful that moment is. It is like turning on a light in a dark room. The shadows do not disappear completely, but they stop looking like monsters. Now, there is another dimension to mental mastery that goes beyond individual thoughts, and that is understanding impermanence. This is a concept that can feel uncomfortable at first, but once it settles into your bones, it becomes one of the most liberating truths you will ever internalize. everything changes. Everything. People's moods change. Relationships evolve. Circumstances shift. The person who was warm yesterday might be distant today. The situation that felt secure last month might feel uncertain now. The plan you counted on might fall apart without warning. Most emotional suffering comes from resisting this reality, from clinging to how things were and panicking when they shift, from demanding permanence in a world that does not offer it, from treating every change as a threat rather than simply as movement. But what if you stopped resisting? What if, instead of white-knuckling every situation, trying to hold it exactly where it is, you allowed things to move? Not with indifference, but with flexibility. Not with detachment, but with trust that you can navigate whatever comes. Think about a tree in a storm. The trees that survive are not the rigid ones that refuse to bend. Those are the ones that snap. The trees that survive are the ones that flex with the wind. They move, they sway, they bend, sometimes so far it looks like they might break. But they do not, because their strength is not in their rigidity. It is in their roots, and their roots allow them to be flexible without being uprooted. Your inner work, everything we have talked about from chapter 1 until now, those are your roots. Self-awareness, self-trust, emotional regulation, comfort in solitude, a sense of wholeness that is not dependent on external conditions. Those roots allow you to flex when life gets stormy without losing yourself. When someone's behavior changes, you do not shatter. You observe, you adapt, you communicate if needed, but you do not lose your ground. When criticism lands, you do not crumble. You assess. You take what is useful. You release what is not. But you do not question your entire identity. When uncertainty shows up, you do not panic. You breathe. You trust your capacity to figure things out. You remind yourself that you have survived every difficult moment that has come before this one, and you will survive this one too. That flexibility, rooted in internal strength, is what mental mastery looks like in action. Let me address something else that drains people's peace more than almost anything else: mental narratives. Your mind does not just interpret individual events, it builds entire storylines. Someone is distant for 2 days, and your mind does not stop at "they are distant." It writes a whole screenplay. They are distant because they are pulling away. They are pulling away because they found someone better. They found someone better because I was never enough. I was never enough because there is something fundamentally wrong with me. 2 days of someone being quiet turned into an existential crisis about your worth as a human being, and none of it, not a single frame of that mental movie, was based on confirmed reality. It was all projection, all fiction, all your mind doing what it does best, which is generating worst-case narratives and presenting them as documentaries. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever caught yourself deep into one of those mental movies and realized you had been suffering for hours over something that only existed in your imagination? The antidote is not suppressing these narratives. It is recognizing them as they form, catching them early, noticing the moment your mind starts building the story and gently saying, "I see what you are doing. I am not going to follow this one. I am going to wait for actual information before I react." This takes practice, a lot of it. Your mind has been writing these stories your entire life, and it is very good at it. It knows exactly which fears to tap into, exactly which insecurities to activate. exactly which old wounds to poke. But with consistent awareness, you get faster at catching the stories before they carry you away. And each time you catch one, each time you choose not to follow the spiral, you strengthen a muscle that eventually becomes stronger than the pattern itself. There is also something important to understand about emotional endurance. Not every uncomfortable emotion is a problem to be solved. Sometimes anxiety is just anxiety. Sometimes sadness is just sadness. Sometimes uncertainty is just the natural human experience of not knowing what comes next. And all of those things, while uncomfortable, are survivable. Most people treat uncomfortable emotions like fires that must be extinguished immediately. The moment they feel anxious, they need someone to reassure them. The moment they feel sad, they need a distraction. The moment they feel uncertain, they need a guarantee. But every time you extinguish the discomfort with an external source, you reinforce the belief that you cannot tolerate it on your own. What if you could? What if the next time anxiety rose, instead of immediately reaching for reassurance, you just let it be there? Let it sit in your chest. Let it hum in the background, and kept going about your day, not ignoring it, not pretending it was not there, just coexisting with it, letting it be present without giving it control. That is endurance. And endurance builds resilience. And resilience is the ultimate foundation of a mind that no one can control. When you reach this place, and you will reach it if you keep practicing, something shifts in how the world interacts with you. Conversations feel lighter because you are not carrying hidden agendas into them. Conflicts feel smaller because your identity is not on the line in every disagreement. Relationships feel freer because you are not constantly monitoring them for threats to your sense of self. People notice this shift even if they cannot explain it. They feel that you are grounded, that you are present, that you are not trying to extract something from them, and that energy, that calm, stable energy of someone who has mastered their own inner world, is one of the most powerful forces in human connection. Not because it demands attention, but because it does not need it. There is a quiet dignity in being able to say, the world can be unpredictable, people can be inconsistent, circumstances can shift without warning, and I will still be okay. Not because nothing affects you, but because you have built something inside yourself that is stronger than any external storm. That is mental mastery, not the absence of difficult thoughts, not the elimination of uncomfortable emotions, but the ability to experience all of it, every thought, every feeling, every uncertainty, without being owned by it. Your mind was never supposed to be your enemy. It was supposed to be your instrument. And like any instrument, it performs beautifully when it is tuned with care and played with intention. The work of mastering your mind is the work of tuning that instrument so that no matter what music life plays around you, the sound that comes from within remains clear, steady, and unmistakably yours. Chapter 10. Waking Up Free, the day you no longer need anyone to feel whole. There will come a morning that feels different from every morning before it. You will not be able to explain it to anyone. There will be no fireworks, no dramatic event the night before, no breakthrough conversation, no life-altering phone call. Everything around you will look exactly the same as it did yesterday. Same room, same ceiling, Same world outside your window, but something inside you will have shifted, and you will feel it the moment your eyes open. You will notice it first in what is absent. There is no urgency to check your phone, no anxious scan of your notifications to see who reached out, who remembered, who proved overnight that you still matter to them. There is no tightness in your chest, wondering if someone's feelings toward you changed while you were sleeping. There is no quiet dread about facing the day without enough reassurance stored up to carry you through. Instead, there is stillness, not emptiness. Stillness, the kind that feels like standing in the center of a room you built with your own hands. Solid walls, a steady floor, a roof that does not leak when storms come. You are inside something you constructed piece by piece through every chapter of this journey, and for the first time, it feels like home. That is what emotional freedom feels like. Not the absence of caring, not the absence of love or desire or connection, the absence of desperation, the absence of dependency, the absence of that constant, exhausting background hum of, am I okay? Am I enough? Do they still want me? You are okay. You know it now. Not because someone told you, because you told yourself over and over, through action, through discipline, through sitting with discomfort when every part of you wanted to run, and eventually your own voice became the one you trusted most. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand how many people go through their entire lives without ever reaching this place? Not because they are incapable, but because they never realized the work was internal. They kept rearranging the furniture of their external lives, switching relationships, changing cities, chasing achievements, hoping the next thing would finally be the thing that made them feel complete. And it never was, because the room they needed to furnish was inside them all along. But you did the work. You looked inward when everything in your conditioning told you to look outward. You sat with yourself when the world told you that being alone meant being broken. You questioned thoughts that had been running unchecked for decades. You built habits that your nervous system now relies on. You learned to regulate emotions that used to regulate you. You separated your identity from the shifting opinions of others. You discovered that wholeness was never something to be found in another person. It was something to be uncovered in yourself. And now, here you are, waking up free. Let me tell you what this freedom looks like in daily life, because it is not some mystical state that exists only in meditation or theory. It is practical. It is lived. It is felt in the smallest moments. It looks like someone disagreeing with you and your chest staying calm. Not because you do not care about their perspective, but because your sense of self is no longer threatened by differing opinions. It looks like plans fallen through and your evening still feeling full. Not because you are pretending it does not matter, but because you have built a relationship with yourself that can hold the space. It looks like someone leaving your life and feeling the grief fully, letting it move through you like weather, without interpreting it as proof that you are unlovable. It looks like love without clinging, generosity without scorekeeping, honesty without fear, boundaries without guilt, solitude without loneliness, connection without desperation. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room and they just seemed settled? Like they were not performing, not scanning for approval, not adjusting themselves to fit the energy around them? They were just there, present, whole, and the room somehow felt better because of it. That is you now, or that is who you are becoming. Either way, the direction is set and the foundation is laid. The rest is just continuing to show up for yourself the way you have been learning to. I want to be honest with you about one more thing before we close this out. This freedom is not permanent in the way a statue is permanent. It is permanent in the way a practice is permanent. You will still have hard days. You will still catch yourself spiraling occasionally. You will still feel the pull of old patterns, the urge to seek reassurance, the temptation to measure your worth through someone else's behavior. That does not mean you have failed. That means you are human. The difference now is that you catch it. You see the spiral starting and you know what it is. You feel the old pull and you recognize it as conditioning, not truth. You might stumble into old patterns for a moment, but you do not live there anymore. You visit, and then you come home to yourself. And that home, that internal space you have built through awareness and discipline and courage, it holds you every single time. So here's where we land, not at an ending, but at a beginning. At the start of this journey, you may have believed that happiness required someone else's participation, that peace was something other people granted you through their consistency, that your worth was determined by who stayed and who left. Now, you know differently. Your peace was never meant to be borrowed. It was meant to be built. Your happiness was never meant to depend on a text message, a compliment, or a promise someone else might not keep. It was meant to be generated from within, sustained by your own habits, your own awareness, your own daily choice to show up for yourself even when no one is watching. You were never half of anything. You were never a draft waiting for someone else to finish writing you. You were always whole, complete, enough. You just had to clear away the layers of conditioning and fear to see it. And now that you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. That is the thing about this kind of freedom. Once you taste it, once you feel what it is like to wake up without emotional dependency, you will never willingly go back to living as someone who needs permission to feel okay. You will still love, probably more deeply than before, because love without desperation has a depth that need-based attachment can never reach. You will still connect, but from overflow, not from deficit. You will still care what people think because you are human and that is natural. But their thoughts will inform you, not define you. This is your life now. A life where your happiness is something you carry, not something you chase. Where your peace is internally generated, not externally dependent. Where your identity is self-defined, not crowdsourced. You were always enough. You just needed to stop asking everyone else to confirm it and start confirming it yourself. And now you have. So wake up tomorrow with that knowledge. Let it sit in your chest like a quiet fire that no one else can extinguish. Let it guide how you speak, how you move, how you love, how you set boundaries, how you spend your time. You do not need anyone to complete you. You never did. And from this moment forward, your happiness is not something the world gives you. It is something you give yourself every single day. That is freedom, and it has always been yours.